I think I was almost kidnapped. So this is something I've kept completely to myself, except for a confused call to my best friend the morning after to try and figure out if what I thought happened actually happened. Truthfully, the event that incited this incident was my fault, and also so stupid, so I think I've been too embarrassed or mad at myself to share the story. I had only been living in New Orleans for about 2-ish weeks the night this occurred, and while I'd never been to New Orleans once in my life prior to moving there, a decision resulting from my desperation to get a job out of college. I am from a similar large metro area in the American South, so I'm familiar with the dynamic of a city like this. 1 minute, you'll see kids playing catch in the streets and young couples walking arm in arm down tropically adorned sidewalks, and the next, you'll see dilapidated buildings, still not made whole since Katrina and further degraded from Ida. You'll see gang violence, young boys posted up on street corners, and unimaginable poverty tied to rampant drug abuse. In the end, it's just all about knowing where to go and which areas to avoid entirely. Anyway, I was driving home from running some obscure errand at night around 9:30 p.m. that caused me to drive through St. Claude. For y'all that don't know, this is certainly one of those neighborhoods that you should avoid if possible. As I came upon a stop sign right next to a small community center and a food bank type place, I suddenly slammed on my brakes due to driver's instincts before really even understanding why I did it. Standing there just a few feet away from my front bumper was a teeny tiny cat, its wide eyes staring back at me in terror as it became briefly blinded by my headlights. That damn cat. This is where my stupidity comes into play. I didn't really know where I was and how dangerous of an area it was. And without even thinking for a single damn moment, I stepped outside of the car to assess the situation, maybe see if I could help the little guy. I didn't even remove my keys from the ignition as I figured I'd only be there for a tiny bit. Didn't even grab my phone from the charger. I figured I'd even be able to beckon over the little cat and help it, or I would just watch it dart away. What I didn't realize when I knelt down on the pavement was that my clumsy ass was too close to the barely open car door, and when I stood up, of course, I bumped it and immediately swung shut. No big deal, I thought, convincing myself that the door would be unlocked, only to feel my heart sink like a stone into my stomach when the door didn't budge. Fuck. I didn't panic immediately. After trying all 4 doors and cursing myself for a solid minute for being such an idiot, I spotted a man sitting on the steps of the community center eating, and he spotted me. Noticing my situation, and to my dismay, he slowly stood up and came to the back of my car with his bag of Raising Cane's chicken, plopped it down on the hood, and proceeded to enjoy his dinner on the back of my Subaru. I'd already been there for a good 10 minutes by this point, so honestly, the company of another person was relieving. I didn't look as helpless to passerbys with him there. For context, I'm about 5 foot and was wearing a tiny tank top to fend off the brutal New Orleans summer heat. After I explained my situation, he explained he could try to jimmy rig the door open, and desperate to get back in, I agreed. It was useless, unfortunately, and I could tell he was just fiddling around. I trotted over to a small church across the intersection where I spotted a few people closing up for the night. Sanctuary, I thought. Nice churchgoers have to help a woman lost and alone, right? Wrong. The man locking up looked straight through me, back at the man now clearly trying to open a locked car door, shook his head, and shot me a glance that said, "Do you think I'm stupid?" and stepped right into his unlocked vehicle. It was at this point that I felt the tears welling up, but quickly told myself to suck it up and walked dejectedly back to my car. By the grace of God, the random stranger let me use his phone to call a locksmith, tastefully called Papa Lock. And he told me he'd be there anywhere between 45 minutes and 4 hours. Great. After about 25 minutes of chit-chatting, the man informed me that his shift was about to start, and just as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. This is when the gravity of my situation really began to sink in, and I became acutely aware of my surroundings, acutely aware of the men who had been circling the block on their bicycles during our whole conversation. I don't know about y'all, but I don't know many grown-ass men who ride around leisurely on bikes after 10 p.m. just for the fun of it. I heard the distant squeak of wheels, and before I could duck for cover, they lapped the block again, now aware that I was, in fact, utterly alone. They continued down the block, and I realized quickly that I needed to find somewhere to be by the time they returned. I swiftly walked towards the community center where I had planned on sitting on the stairs, but quickly realized it was entirely too illuminated, and I'd be making myself a beacon amid the darkness of the neighborhood. Plus, as I rounded the corner, I saw a tall man standing in total darkness alongside of the building, just staring straight forward, facing the steps, not even 10 feet away from them. Getting desperate, I jogged over to the church, and hearing the wheels nearing again, I squatted down behind the big sign in front of the building. As I sat there in the dirt, I couldn't help it anymore, and I cried just a little bit. The combination of fear and frustration really put it over the edge. After a while, I didn't hear any more movement, and because my butt hurt from sitting on the ground and the bugs were starting to come out beneath me, I decided to move spots like some stupid game of hide and seek. I had spotted a fenced-off area that appeared to be a restaurant earlier, and after finding the door to be unlocked, I darted inside and latched it behind me, sighing with relief. At that point, I sat myself at a table where I could peer through the fence at my car to see if the locksmith had pulled up, and I waited. After what felt like days, but was probably more like 1 to 2 hours, the horrifying realization dawned on me that I had only made one singular call to the Papa Lock people and gave a vague description of the intersection where I was at. What if they couldn't find me? What if they had driven past a long time ago and they didn't see me? Were they long gone by now? I didn't know if I should keep waiting or not, or venture back out in the hopes of catching them if they were circling the block looking for my car. After about 30 minutes, I decided I would just have to go out there. The men were gone, and although it was a bad neighborhood, it just didn't feel right, and it progressively got worse come the early hours of the morning, and I didn't want to find out. It is so painfully obvious in retrospect, but of course, the moment I left the safety of my little restaurant hideaway, those damn wheels began to round the corner. Shit. I literally could not have looked more out of place and vulnerable. I felt so exposed that there was no time to go back across the intersection to the fenced-off area and to get to the church. I'd have to run through the bike path of 2 men. As I sprinted toward my car, a black truck rolled by, and to my horror, stopped just moments after passing me, put it in reverse, and began to roll slowly back in my direction. I almost resigned myself to my seemingly inevitable capture, assault, and God knows what as I watched it roll towards me. I pretended to walk away as if I were not utterly aimless, trying to give off the impression that I wasn't locked out of my still running car without any and all resources. The men on the bikes were close now. Then, as if in an episode of CSI, the pop-a-lock truck rounded the corner. I instantly began waving my arms to flag them down, and as the truck drove off, my savior parked his van. Apparently, he had been looping around the area for 20 minutes trying to find me and was about to give up to go help another stranded woman. If I had stayed behind the fence, he likely would have, and I would have been left without any means of communication to call anyone else for help. The moment I got inside my beloved Subaru, I began sobbing at the click of the locks behind me. God, it was pure relief to be secured within a locked space. Even as I'm writing this now, I feel dramatic, like I was freaking out over nothing. But in my recollection, working through the details does help to validate my experience. So, to those men on their dinky little bikes, let's never meet again. A late-night car chase with a deranged Uber driver. Still a little shaken from this, so my apologies. I live in the outskirts of one of the largest cities in the Northeast, in a quiet section of the city with a small town feel. I go to the gym in the suburbs and was headed home from a pretty intense workout, ready to get home, pet my dog, and take a much-needed shower. Now, to get back into my section of the city from the suburbs, there's an old 4-lane bridge that leads into a few of the main streets of the neighborhood. The lanes aren't separated by markings, but there are signs on the bridge and everyone respects the 2 cars to a lane policy. As I was driving across the bridge, I stayed in the right lane to go straight across, as the left lane is a turn lane. As I reached the end of the lane, I noticed that the car at the end was over into my lane by about a foot, and I did my best to cut around him, but one of my tires ended up hitting the sidewalk as I made my way into my lane. I glanced over at this guy, didn't flip him off or act aggressively, but I'm sure my face expressed my thought of, "What the fuck are you doing?" The light turned green, and I went straight across and noticed that the car that had been blocking my lane, despite being in the turning lane, went straight as well. Looking at my rearview mirror, I could see an illuminated Uber light in his windshield. I continued up this semi-residential street, stopping at each sign on the way up, this car remaining behind me the whole way. As I was already thinking, this guy doesn't know how to drive, I kept an eye on my rear view as I approached another main street in the area. As I was waiting at the light, I noticed that this guy had turned his Uber light off, and something in me realized that something was wrong. I'm not sure what it was, but that Uber light gave me some sort of comfort that this guy was working, and his conscious act of turning it off made me uneasy. As I turned onto the main street, I made the first left I could, and the Uber made the turn right behind me. I was now on a residential street, but as I knew the area, I drove at a conscious speed, making a couple turns, heading toward the highway. The Uber pursued, his bumper about 1.5 feet away from mine. Halfway down the residential street, there was no doubt in my mind that he was following me. Now, despite having a very button-up office job and soft-spoken personality, I don't necessarily think I'm a prime target for being chased. I'm a big guy. I'm between 6'5" and 6'6", and a little under 200 pounds, muscular, and I have a ton of tattoos. I'm sure this guy saw me as I pulled up next to him on the bridge, and from my glance at him, he looked older and much smaller than myself. While the thought of pulling over and escalating things did cross my mind, with the rate of gun crime in my city, that thought was gone as soon as it came. All I could focus on was getting to a safe place and making sure this maniac didn't find out where I lived. As I turned onto the highway, he followed again, cutting across several lanes and accelerating to catch up to me. I made the first right I was able to, then led him down a winding maze of back streets, his car inches from my bumper the entire time. I wasn't paying attention to one-ways, stop signs, or speed limits at this point. I just knew I needed to get away. All the while, the Uber followed, matching my speed and taking every sharp turn I did through the maze of streets. Realizing that I needed to get back to a more populated area in case this guy decided to shoot me or hit my car, I headed back in the direction of the main street, spotting out of the corner of my eye the parking lot of a fast food restaurant that provided a shortcut to the main road. I blasted through the parking lot, this man speeding in after me, and I felt hopeless. If this guy was willing to follow me through all of that, he couldn't stop until he caught me. I weighed my options as I turned onto the main street. Police department was about a 10-minute drive away, but there were several lights and crosswalks between myself and safety. I decided that I would head through the back streets in the direction, trying my best to lose him as I went. I didn't want to give this guy an opportunity to get out of his car in a red light and hurt me in some sort of way. I had to head in that direction and pray that I didn't hit any red lights. As I rounded the corner out of the parking lot, my worst case scenario was revealed. A red light with a car already stopped. It was opposing traffic. I know it was irresponsible, but I didn't hesitate. I merged into the oncoming lane and made a left going the wrong way down a one-way residential street. A few beeps from other cars around me rang out, but I didn't care. I just prayed that I had made an irresponsible enough maneuver to throw this guy off and created enough confusion to get away. I looked in my rear view and didn't see headlights. I drove to the end of the block of the one-way. I made a few random turns down the streets, pulling into the parking lots of an apartment complex and turning my car off. My adrenaline was winding down and I could not stop shaking. I laid my seat all the way back and called the police non-emergency line. The lady who answered the phone was entirely unhelpful and directed me to call 911. All I had was a brief description of the car and the guy, whose face I could not recall well. The police told me that they were just going to write it up as a disturbance. They told me to drive home, as some time had passed between the chase ending and their getting to me. Being the ever paranoid person that I am, I parked several blocks down from my house, changed clothes in my car, put on a hat, and walked home, on the lookout for this guy in his car the whole way. I thought I saw his car turn left down another block as I walked, but I told myself that even if it was him, he wouldn't be able to recognize me outside of my car. Now, as I am home typing this out, my large dog next to me, and a drink in my hand, I feel helpless. I'm scared to drive my car in the city and run into this crazy person, scared of what he might do to me. I'm worried this guy will drive around and see my car, find out where I live, and try to come after me or my family in some sort of way. I've never considered purchasing a weapon legally, but this encounter is making me consider it. All I can do now is try to move on and hope that he doesn't get any rides in the area. So, deranged Uber driver who chased me through the back streets of my city because he didn't understand traffic patterns, let's not meet again. Winter of 2014, there was an unknown attacker. This happened in 2014-2015. I was about 20 years old at the time. I will give you some context before letting you know exactly what happened. I was studying in a lovely seaside city in France, and everyone was cycling at the time. Cycling to school, to work, to parties, etc. It was a very safe place, full of tourists and students. I lived and studied in this city between 2012 and 2015, up until the events I'm going to mention. I never ever felt unsafe, and I didn't hear anything from my friends either. In December of 2014, my boyfriend took me to his engineering school's Christmas party. We were a large group of friends and mingled a lot. One of the guys from the group, whom I didn't know personally, left the party without anyone noticing. A month later, he was found dead in the harbor, and the police never figured out what had happened. I went online to check if there was any news about it, and it's still a cold case. I didn't know him, but I think about it all the time. Was it because he was alone? Did he fall? Or did someone push him? Why didn't anyone care to walk home with him? Needless to say, the city started to feel a whole lot less safe. But at 20 years old, I didn't have the same understanding of such things as I do now because I'm 30 and my life carried on. A couple of months have passed, and it was the beginning of 2015. A friend was assaulted badly while cycling back home from an after party. He was found in critical condition, his body lying halfway on the road and halfway on the sidewalk. His head had been smashed on the sidewalk step, and his jaw was completely shattered. He was a big guy in every sense possible. Not the sort of guy you could just push around easily. When he was recovering in the hospital, he couldn't make sense of what had happened. He had no idea why he was attacked on his bike. The police did not find the suspects. 2 students my age in the same friend circles were brutally assaulted for no reason. I still cycled everywhere because I had no other choice. I lived 8 kilometers away from my school, and I didn't have any other means of transportation. This meant that I cycled approximately 16 to 20 kilometers every day, and I had been doing this since 2012. We are in the spring of 2015. I'm cycling back home from a party with my boyfriend. I've had a few drinks, but I'm not drunk. I'm just tired. My boyfriend is annoying me because he is not waiting for me, and the distance between us keeps getting bigger. Suddenly, someone jumps on me. He appears from nowhere and kicks my bike to the ground. I have been cycling so much. I am so used to the bike. I let it fall between my legs, but I do not fall. I resist and stand up. It's a man. I reach for my bike, which is now on the ground, with my left hand. I'm trying to get a hold of the handlebars. He kicks me, then my hand. He kicks again and again, but I'm already holding the handlebars. It hurts, but I'm lifting the bike. He says something and I don't hear it. I see my boyfriend looking at me. He's a bit far away, but he's stopped. He's going to help me. The man will see I'm not alone. I'm still standing and lifting my bike, and it's been maybe 2 or 3 seconds since the man jumped on me. My boyfriend is looking at me, and then he turns his back. My heart drops. He starts pedaling away. It's the dead of night, and there's no one else. I'm on my own. The man keeps kicking. He wants me to let go. My hand looks blue, but my grip is strong. I think about the other 2 students. They give me strength. I thought about my boyfriend. The sight of him cycling away fills me with pure rage. I'll use this rage. The man is holding some kind of glass in his hand. I grab it with my free hand and I smash it into his face. I'm doing it, and I'm furious. I'm getting the bike up. Surely the glass had alcohol in it because it burns his eyes. I have a split second to launch myself and start pedaling away. He can't reach my hand anymore, so he kicks my bike one more time. I stand strong on the pedals. He tries to chase me, but I am faster. I pedal until I can no longer breathe. I pedal until I feel numb. That night, I know I escaped something terrible. Due to the stress, I couldn't describe the man. I'll never know for sure if my experience was linked to other attacks. However, we were all walking and cycling on the same route. 10 years later, I can remember the look on my ex-boyfriend's face when he turned his back on me. Let's never meet either of these 2 men again. Followed home. September 4th, 2022. I was at home waiting on my boyfriend to get home. It was getting late and I was impatient, so I decided to go out to get some snacks from the gas station by myself. We live in a city that really isn't the best place for a then 22-year-old woman to be out alone at night. It's normal to hear gunshots, see cars get stolen, and there have been armed robberies at both of the gas stations by my house since I've lived there. Nevertheless, I was hungry and wanted some snacks, so off into the night I went for them. On my way to the gas station, my boyfriend passed me headed home on his bike when I was nearly there, a detail that is crucial to how things would play out. It was sometime around or shortly after 11 p.m. that I made it to the 7-Eleven and pulled in by a pump. Before I even had a chance to take my keys out of the ignition, a woman was standing at my passenger side door trying to talk to me through it. Another long story short, before this had happened, my best friend and I had a couple attempt to carjack us in another city. Ever since then, I've always locked my doors the second I get in my car, and had done just that this night. I stayed in my car and told her I couldn't hear her, so she walked to my side of the car. I stayed in my car and told her I couldn't hear her, so she walked to my side of the car. She said something along the lines of her ride not being able to pick her up, because their car had broken down and that she needed a ride while holding up text on her phone. I told her, "I'm really sorry, but I don't help people at night," and immediately drove off. I was annoyed that I didn't get my snacks, but I wrote it off. Just before arriving at my house, I take a left turn, then start down a curving road with a shopping center on the right. The first light on this stretch of road leads to my neighborhood, where I make another left on. When I took my first left and approached the entrance to the shopping center, a car swerved out in front of me and stayed on the center line the entire way to the light. I kept my distance and pulled in behind them into the turning lane of my neighborhood. When we made the turn, they stopped next to the curb on the right side of the entrance. This put me on high alert, and I passed them quickly. I'm going to try my best to describe the shape of the area of my neighborhood that this took place in, for context. When you pull into the neighborhood, there is a long straight road that has a left-hand turn shortly after the entrance and a right-hand turn further down. Both entrances connect into a loop going around the entire neighborhood, and the straight road we were on is the main road in and out that connects them. I passed them on the main road and drove down to the second turn to head to my house. When I passed, they started to drive as well and followed me at a distance. Other people pull in behind me all the time, but this just felt different. I passed my parking spot, but took note that my boyfriend was home, making my way through the loop that would lead to the other entrance. For a split second, I almost thought I was overreacting. As I drove slowly through the loop over the speed bumps to prevent speeding, they got closer and closer to me. Over the last few, they were so close I couldn't see the front of their vehicle. After the last bump, there's a small turn with a dumpster and then a straight to the main road. When we hit this curve, a man was walking to the dumpster and they backed off significantly. I took this as my chance and I took off away from them. I turned left back towards my house on the main road while yelling at Siri to call my boyfriend. I told him, "Come outside with an XYZ," and floored it down the main road, blaring my horn the whole way. The car gunned it after me, and I prayed that my boyfriend would be outside in time. I quickly pulled into my spot, still honking, and the car skidded to a stop behind me at an angle, so I couldn't back out shortly after I parked. Two grown men immediately jumped out of the car while I stayed in mine, horrified. They quickly started to approach my doors until they saw that someone was waiting for them. My boyfriend told them that they needed to get back in their car and to leave and to not make a single move near me again. They tried to argue, saying that I followed them and some other nonsense that I honestly couldn't understand over my sheer panic and adrenaline rush. My boyfriend was ready to stand his ground and do whatever he had to do to protect me, and conveyed that. The men eventually left, and I took my time getting out of the car, still in complete shock. The police were called and showed up nearly 2 hours later, saying that they didn't see the car in the area. Wonder why. They never looked any further into it. Needless to say, my boyfriend was with me every night and would even meet me at the entrance of the neighborhood after work to ride me home for some time after that. I often think about what those men would have done if I had turned around or not even thought twice and pulled into my space to begin with. Would they have followed me all the way to the police station if my boyfriend wasn't home? Was that woman a part of it? The whole thing makes me nauseous. I had a feeling for a couple weeks before this happened to keep an extra eye out on cars behind me to make sure I wasn't being followed. A crazy thing to look back on now. It's very scary to think about how things could have ended if I had let that woman in my car or didn't have someone scare them off. To the woman who approached my car and possibly set me up, get wrecked. To the men who followed me and intended to do God knows what to me, let's definitely never, ever meet again.